see it, but through a picture about the size of a postage stamp, which I saw as a young assistant editor of the Architectural Review in London 35 years ago, in a giant German encyclopedia of contemporary architecture. I didn't understand a word of it at the time, and but my editor said, "Will you look through this enormous book, which is about the size of a concrete block, very German, rational, organized, efficient. Can you find anyone there that we, the great mighty Architectural Review in London, don't know?" And we should know. Under M, Makovecz, Imre, or Imre Makovecz, of course in English, I saw this little picture. I was just taken by it. Here was some sort of architectural magic or architectural sorcery at work. I didn't know what it was. What is it? The inside of a whale, the whale that swallowed Jonah. Not quite what it is it? But I had no idea. I sent a letter to the editor of the Hungarian quarterly magazine. I said, "Please send me information about this architect, and please send me some photographs and some drawings." He sent back an address. Well, I don't know how to say it. Is it Viliani? Utka 8? The Makovetz's family address. Mariana wrote back saying, "Come and see us." That led to an interview with the cultural attaché in London at the Hungarian embassy, who was a very interesting gentleman, very cultured. But he said, "Mr. Glancey, we can show you many things in Hungary. We can take you on a tour of new architecture. We have many fine new buildings. But we do not understand why you would like to see and meet this Makovecz Imre." 3 weeks later, my passport came back from the secret world of the Hungarian embassy in former times, and stamped with a visa. And off I went via Vienna, where I met lots of energetic architects, Hans Hollein and company, doing great museums and galleries. And I took the Wiener Walzer train, which, intriguingly in those days, like, do you know the Tintin comics? But you lived through this, it's not a comic. The train was stopped in the pouring rain at the border between Austria and Hungary, and these guards got on in cartoon Tintin uniforms with red stars and Second World War Tommy guns. I'd never seen a Second World War Tommy gun in my life, except in those old photographs of Winston Churchill in the Second World War with a cigar. They got on the train and they took my bag apart. They took the panels off the ceiling in the train. I was totally bemused. I was reading the Times, as you do, of course, which I bought in Vienna, the London Times, and I just watched them and smiled. And smiling did me no good because they got quite cross. And even crosser because outside the window a steam train came past, a beautiful Hungarian steam locomotive, still running then in 1981, and I started photographing. And the guard said, "Just thump me on the shoulder. I'm not very big," and he was. I nearly went to the floor. Steam trains in Soviet, I think he said Soviet Hungary, didn't I? Sorry. Steam trains in Hungary in former times were a state secret. Nobody was allowed, no spy, young spy from London was allowed to photograph a steam locomotive. What a strange introduction. Far strange in a way was actually getting to know this extraordinary man, his wonderful family, and his extraordinary architecture. When I saw this building, I didn't speak a word of Hungarian, of course. I still don't, sadly, apart from igem, nem, and so on. But I just felt in my heart and my bones what this was. And when Makovecz spoke, and when we were together by ourselves, we drew, which was, I've got the notebooks, and I promised to give them to Pearl because they are touching. We spoke in drawings, and that made sense. But when he spoke to me of building beings, it said it all, of a certain asymmetry which we have in our face and our bodies. Of course, I sort of understood. When I came back to London and wrote about Makovecz, I got lots of things wrong. And I've been ticked off in very strict Hungarian journals and books and magazines. Glancey got it wrong. But not in spirit, he didn't. I saw something, and I'll show you what it was. Here we are trying to look at this postage stamp illustration. What is it? Well, it's this, I suppose, from an English perspective, which I want to talk about for a minute, and then an international perspective, and why Makovecz matters so much internationally to all architects and to all human beings and to all our hearts and souls. This building, look at that face at the end. It's a bit like a Makovecz design, isn't it? It's Wells Cathedral in Somerset in England. It is a rib cage, of course. It's a ship. It's a body. It's a soul. It has eyes, a face. This is evensong, an evening service in a 13th century space. It's a ship of souls. It's a place of the heart. It's architecture built asymmetrically by craftspeople. And that asymmetry wanders up inside that cathedral through this wonderful stair, this pilgrim stair, which takes you through that big mouth at the end, and into this chapter house, the meeting place for bishops. And what you see there is a representation in stone, granite, and marble of a palm tree. Makovecz would have loved this. Architecture formed from trees, a sacred grove. But more than that, Christ, as you know, when he rode into Jerusalem before his crucifixion, rode under a canopy of palms. The religious symbolism is strong, but it's realized beautifully here, a palm tree for Christ's disciples to preach. And the English tradition was to take that out further and further until palms in the 15th century became these great umbrella, parasol architecture, these fan vaults over the greatest works of medieval English architecture. Trees not frozen into stone, but trees alive in stone. Until the point came where the trees, form a complete architecture. It's wonderful. And what you're doing here in King's College Chapel here in Cambridge, you're walking in a sacred grove of trees. That's the point, it's a sacred grove. And when I saw the work of Makovecz and met him, and he drew these trees all over my notebook, I sort of felt, I know what you're talking about, even though we may misunderstand each other in technical, professional detail. And why not? Well, look, here's a building by Makovecz. And there we are. It's the same language, really, isn't it? He would have understood those English masons 500 years ago only too well. It's the same spirit at work. It's the sacred grove, the architecture of trees, as this great canopy above us. Sacred buildings, secular buildings, Makovecz developed this idea with his colleagues. It was taken, of course, to extremes in an architect he greatly admired, and whose successor is here today, of course, the nave of Sagrada Familia, which is a forest. Most beautiful, extraordinary, complex forest, sacred forest to walk through. And out in everyday walks in the woods, you just do see this. Look at this. This is early English Gothic, pointed 13th century Gothic, in trees. It's all, nature does it for us. This is perpendicular Gothic with a fan vaulting we saw. This is in France, but it's the same spirit. Oh, there's an illustration from the Architecture Review. Interesting thing, that tradition wasn't just from masons, not just a Gothic tradition, or what we've learned to call an organic tradition, which we've seen in the works of Gaudi or Makovecz. It was there in the classical tradition too. Here in this illustration of 1755, in Abbé Logier's great essay on architecture, there's this illustration here, it's lovely, this beautiful lady is architecture. And there she is, sitting on these perfect Grecian columns, pointing at the architect, this little baby here, this little cherub's the architect, all innocent. And she's saying, go and look at the trees, look at nature, for example, and build architecture. Create this primitive hut. And one day, little baby, as you grow up to be a big architect, it will turn into a sacred grove of trees here at Pestum. Very different from the Gothic tradition, but look, the trees, the columns. It's the same thing if you see it that way. Here is architecture into nature in a totally different way. And here's the primitive hut again, 2,000 years later by Imre Makovecz. Something one recognized. Makovecz said to me, this comes from, the tradition of yurts. And I said, yes, it's a primitive hut. And he said, yeah, it's a primitive hut. And that ancient tradition never loses its power or its importance. It's a building I love straight away. Here's the international dimension now. Everybody in this room probably agrees Imre Makovecz was a great, talented, and visionary architect. An absolutely delightful man in every way. Powerful, strong. And as I knew him, met him, funny, warm, kind, and very exciting to be with. One question that was asked before I came here by Paul raised the question, how has this architecture developed? Is it a specifically Hungarian architecture? Is it a specifically Makovecz architecture with a small number of architects in Eastern Europe developing this idea? Or here and there, perhaps in Finland or in America, one or two places? No. What's interesting, when I first published Makovecz in the Architecture Review in London in '81, not knowing that Marko was doing in Finland, by the way, today I would know because we'd just Google everything. We didn't have those things then. We didn't have mobile phones, computers. We just wrote letters and sent pictures to each other. But look what has happened. I was inundated, so flooded with letters when I published Makovecz in London, by people saying, who is this man? Tell us more. The letters came truly from around the world. Letters, not emails, and people were really interested. I can't say that any of the buildings I'm about to show you very quickly have anything to do specifically with Imre Makovecz's architecture. What I can say is that he helped to create the spirit, revive the spirit of nature, architect, the building being, asymmetry, to take us away from an architecture of the obvious, whether Bauhaus right angles or postmodern tricks and games. Look at this. These are all new buildings. Look at these trees. These are palm trees. This is a restaurant in Sydney designed by a Japanese architect. Life changes, doesn't it? We live in a more global world. Australia, Sydney, Japanese architect. Look at this. The trees are made of plywood and they are machined by computers. Another change in our lives. Computer technology doesn't have to mean dry, hard, cold, steely, unfeeling technology. These beautiful trees are created by computers. Somebody has to design it, though. The computer doesn't design it, the architect does. Look at this, fan vaulting today. Shigeru Ban, a Japanese architect. This is a golf club, for all of you who love golf, in South Korea. These great leaves, plant-like forms, are part of a new conference centre in Oxford by Zaha Hadid. This is a new chapel near Oxford by the architect Neil McLaughlin. It fits among the trees. It's a theological college. Not one tree, of course, was chopped down to fit it in. When you get to the texture of the chapel, it's like the bark of an old tree, an ancient oak tree. And when you get inside, look at this. That tradition alive. This building was finished 2 years ago. The spirit alive, a Gothic tradition, an organic tradition, but most of all, a tradition of taking nature and making it into something new for our own generation. The wood here is plywood. And again, computers have been used to get the geometry exact. And look at this. Architects who specialize in really engineering structures have been doing the same thing in recent years. Where's this? Do you know it? Might be anywhere in a way, but look at the trees. Architectural trees, engineering trees. This is Vancouver International Airport. Designed by a huge firm of architects. It employs more architects than there are in Hungary. But they've got that feeling for things, amazingly. And they were one of the practices that wrote to me all those years ago asking, can we see some more drawings by Imre Makovecz? Germany, here's Cologne Station. Look at this, Gothic vaulting again, trees. Here's this super high-tech train running under a forest. And look at the relationship, of course, between the building, the new building, and the Gothic cathedral. They work hand in hand. Here's fan vaulting, brand new, look at it. King's Cross Station in London recently completed the new concourse. Look at it, it's a walk in the forest again. Very beautiful open forest. And who's this? Well, this isn't Imre Makovecz. It sort of could be, couldn't it, out in Visegrad. This is a young Vietnamese architect, von Tron. And he's developed an architecture along these similar lines, using bamboo, trees, to create very low-cost architecture, reminds you of Makovecz's early days too, for communities with very little money, but who want something special in a very poor country that's very overcrowded. Vo Trong Nha is another architect who said some years ago, "Dear Mr. Glancey, you know something about the Hungarian architect Imre Makovecz. Please could you send me drawings, links, photographs?" Vo Trong Nha in Ho Chi Minh cities since developed, well, 2 years ago, these houses. These are low-cost houses with trees in the center of them. They grow out of the top of the houses, these low-cost concrete houses, and these oak trees, and already you can see you're looking up into a sacred grove again. The trees already 2 years later are starting to meet, so they will form a fan vault and keep the sun and the heat off these low-cost houses. He's designed too, look at this. This is a kindergarten for children of parents who work for virtually no money in a shoe factory. It's nature, those Celtic patterns, those spiral patterns that Makovecz loved, and the trees growing up. Look at this, nature, spirals. And although Imre would not perhaps have approved of this project, what Vo Trong Nha here is trying to say in South, in Ho Chi Minh City, is where we have a problem with huge density of people with no money, we can build great big apartment blocks. This hasn't been done, it could be done, but we can still make them a forest rather than just brutal Soviet-style housing blocks of the 50s, 60s, or 70s. Imre was said to me anyway, he mostly fiercely anti-Bauhaus because he thought the Bauhaus was a tired old lady or something like that, he said. But of course, there were modern movement architects who could express the same powerful feeling in totally different forms. Never forget Ronchamp and Le Corbusier. Here's a glade, a sacred grove, a glade in the forest again, in concrete. And here's Zaha Hadid, last year in Oxford, creating a building that comes out like a snake in the forest amongst the trees, set amongst Gothic buildings. And again, not only have no trees been removed to put the new building in, but new trees are being planted. So this building will glisten like a slithery snake out of a forest within a year or so. Well, this is a joke, of course. These are, as ever, playful Dutch architects suggesting, well, we could even turn the latest super new technology into trees. And our wind turbines, this is a prototype, could be a tree. Actually, all wind turbines do is generate the electricity they need to turn their propellers, so it's a rather daft idea. So that walk in the woods I've talked about, which I first saw in Imre Makovecz's work 35 years ago, has resonated in different ways, not just in Eastern Europe or Europe, but right around the world. It's this idea that nature and something more, the spiritual, the eternal, still do matter, and that it's that spirit married to nature that really moves human hearts more than anything else. It's that walk in the woods that will continue to inspire architects with souls, hearts, and feelings. Makovecz managed to bring all those things together. And what I like about coming here today, when we're celebrating him, his 80th birthday, is not so much that he's someone that's dead, because he's not, because you just need to look around these walls at these drawings of a building that's yet to come, and despite what you all think, it will happen. Don't worry, it'll happen one day. That building will get built. Sagrada Familia is being built. This will be built. Extraordinary things happen when there is the passion, the heart, and the soul to do it. And when those passions and that spirit get right back to the heart of the core human experience. That walk in the trees that created Gothic architecture, classical architecture, organic architecture, the work of Makovecz. And when we look up amongst those trees, these could be high buildings, these could be skyscrapers, these could be Gothic spires, couldn't they? Or they could just be trees. When we look up, oh, what happened? Come back. Go back one. I'm sorry, everybody. Will you be patient with me 1 second? Look at all those things again. They're lovely. There. And up there, you see, there he is, this guardian angel of architecture, still working up there. He is, there he is. He's still at work, still with us. An architect like Makovecz will never die in spirit because he got to that deep core of human love, affection, and the connection between architecture and nature. Thank you very much.